And I'm now joined by an actor who needs very little introduction to the world of Doctor Who. An actor, a writer, someone with an amazing breadth of experience in the performing arts, which we're going to talk about today, David Banks. Hello, David.
Hello.
Hello.
Like my cyber hands.
So, David, we're recording this on Good Friday 2020. And of course, at the moment, the world is locked down. How are you coping with being locked down at the moment?
Very well. It's a lovely time, really, because it takes away some of the pressure of having to do the normal things, like talk to people.
Yeah.
And, and so you just sit there and think and write, read, watch films. And of course, it'd be nice to get back to normal, whatever normal is. Maybe it'll be a new normal when we get back to it. But for the moment, it's kind of in between.
Yes, it is. It is. What would you suggest to people at the moment would be should be on the reading list or the watch list if they were to look for it?
I've just watched this morning because I went back to H.G. Wells, started reading a few short stories, and I just watched Things to Come, which is available, folks, on YouTube. It's 1.5 hours. It was made in 1936. And it just shows an extraordinary distance of imagination. H.G. Wells was always thinking decades, if not centuries, in the future. And this film is his attempt, because he wrote it, to try and put that vision into visual terms. And what struck me was that, is this the basis for an idea about Cybermen too? Yeah. And it's not, we think of Cybermen as already formed. And when we meet them in the 10th planet, they come on and they have no emotion. And that is a big debate. They seem to think that the way that they live, the way that they look, the way that they can confer immortality is by converting other people. And they think that there's no way that those other people, rationally, should not agree to be converted. And that is the basis, of course, of the other stories that come from Doctor Who about Cybermen.
Yes.
But in Things to Come, we have a similar sort of debate between almost a brutish emotion and a rarefied scientific logic. And it's after a terrible war. He predicted 1940 starting. This was in 1936. He predicted a war starting in 1940, going on for 20 or so years, destroying everything. And then the scientific side of humanity that survives begins to try and mop up those brutish areas. And it's as if they believe they're going to be accepted because this is logical. But the interesting thing is that this is presented as if it is going to be our future. And there is no question that we would want this logical, rarefied future. And the last few words are something like, conquest after conquest. The universe or nothing. Which is it to be? The universe or nothing? Well, that's exactly the kind of question the Cybermen would ask.
It is, absolutely. As well as, of course, the assumption, I suppose you could call it, that you would want to be turned into something more like them. Why wouldn't you want to strip away the flesh and become what they are?
Yeah.
Does because I know that you're interested in science fiction generally, and I think, is John Wyndham another author who you particularly like?
Well, I read a lot of science fiction, from about the age of 10. Started with H.G. Wells and Jules Verne and so on. And yeah, Wyndham was one of those authors. And of course, I think whenever one comes across Wyndham or a similar kind of dystopian writer, one's intrigued by this feeling of the post-apocalyptic era, of a time when civilization as we know it has sort of been destroyed suddenly within our generation. So we knew what it was like to live normal times. And yet we're catapulted into a time when there's hardly anybody about, there's destruction, but also we seem to be able to still live, scavenge on the remnants of that civilization. That's what was quite interesting in The Day of the Triffids. But he, Wyndham is a writer like Wells. He's somebody who can, true science fiction, Arthur C. Clarke, somebody else, who can take a scientific concept. So rather than space fantasy, it's built into what is known at the moment. But as Arthur C. Clarke said, magic is science sufficiently removed from us that we don't understand it. So we ascribe the idea of magic to it.
Did your interest in science fiction provoke your interest in performance, or did the two were they completely separate, would you say?
Well, performance with Doctor Who, coming into Doctor Who. But of course, I've been an actor for,
Yeah, I was wondering, in general, I mean, where did that first initial interest come from? What was it that made you realise, there is a thing called performing, and I can do that?
It was playing a wizard, actually.
Right.
When I was about 6 or something at primary school. Dressing up, my father lent me his silver cane as my magic wand, and I think I wore a false beard and a long cloak, and it was just the idea, I suppose, of entering into another personality, another person, in a way, a way of hiding oneself, a way of communicating with the people in the audience.
Yeah.
So that's my earliest memory of it.
Right. And which part of that most interested you, do you think? Was it the escape from reality, or was it the audience adoring you? Which was it that provoked that real interest?
I'm not sure whether many of the 6-year-olds adored me, but it is the idea that suddenly you're in a different world, and it's what happens when you read a book or see a film or something. You enter that world, and the difference is when you're learning a part, when you're getting into a character, you are part of that world. There's a book, we may get onto it, but it's slightly removed from Doctor Who. But I was in a soap called Canary Wharf, and in 1996, and I began to write about the process. I'd already been in one soap. I'd been in Brookside a few years earlier, and I realized that the process of being in a soap was a bit different from a process of learning a play, knowing the ending. As you were rehearsing it, as you were playing it, it was a beginning and an end which were known. Real life isn't like that. But in a soap, we never know the end. We don't know what's around the corner. And that intrigued me as a way of examining how close soap was to real life. Now, the concept of being in that soap or being an actor is close to what I symbolized it by using the myth of the golem, which is a kind of clay figure, ancient story, and you breathe life into it, and it becomes animated. The process of being an actor in a soap is that we breathe life into ourselves. We are the golem, and we are the creator of the golem. It's rather scary, actually, but my time in Doctor Who prepared me for that, I should say.
Yes, yeah. Before we go there, what was your first professional experience working? Was this theatre or television?
Oh, it was theatre. Yeah, I did about 3 years in what was known as rep theatre. We spent almost a year at a theatre, or doing tours from that theatre. I was at the Manchester Library Theatre, first of all, for a year. my first role was in a musical. I think the only time I was in a musical. And then I went to Humberside Theatre Company, and that was kind of going home. Strangely, I was at Manchester University, and then Bristol Old Theatre School, and then I came back to Manchester Library for that year, and then I went almost back home to Hull, where Humberside Theatre Company was. And then I went to Cardiff, and I was there for a year and a half or so. And I played Sherlock Holmes and Dracula. And it was only then I came to London and started to do the television as well as theatre.
Yeah. Was the repertory system something that you think helped? I mean, because it seems like a wonderful idea, but is it a performance in the evening whilst you're rehearsing in the afternoon and learning another play in the morning? So how do you cope with that?
Well, that sounds terrifying. That sounds a bit like weekly rep, but this was 3 weekly, 4 weekly rep.
Right.
It was a case, though, of performing in the evening one play that you'd already rehearsed, and then during the day rehearsing the play that you were going to perform in 3 or 4 weeks' time.
Mm-hmm. Exhausting, I guess.
Well, it was, we had to play in the evening and we had to get up in the morning. Mm-hmm. And for actors, that's normally not now how you do it, unless you're all the cast of Doctor Who now, they'll be working through the day. It's really hard work.
Yeah.
And I think people sort of forget that. They think that they come to the theatre, they see people putting a show on, they think, oh, it's just for me, oh yeah, it's all right. They don't think that cast may have had to do the play once before that day in the matinee.
Yeah.
They may be rehearsing something else. They may be going off to do voiceovers or an advert or something like that. It's if you're lucky enough to be that busy, which I was for 2 or 3 decades, then it's probably worth more than the money that most jobbing actors get paid.
Yeah. And as an actor, if you had to make it's a very simplistic decision, but if you had to choose either theatre performance or television performance, which is the one that for you really, really excites you as a performer?
You have total control, almost total control as a theatre actor. Mm-hmm. It's totally up to you. You step on the stage, it's in real time. And I suppose for that reason, I find theatre work the most exciting. Mm. When you're doing television or film, television and film are sort of coalesced now. Mm. When we started with Earthshock, for example, it was multi-camera work, and you rehearsed for most of 2 weeks, and then you would do 2 days in the studio and almost perform it like a play, but you'd do each scene separately, one after the other very quickly. Now, you do a television, and it's filming. It's one camera, and then one camera set up. You do your bit to the camera, then the camera is over your shoulder, whatever. Mm. So, and all of that is put together in a way that you have no control over. Mm. So I think, my preference, especially with the fact that every time you do it, it may seem the same, but it's subtly different because of the way you're feeling or the other actors are feeling, or because of the way the audience are feeling, or if they're there at all, if you manage to get an audience in, or if it's a huge audience, like the audiences that we got for Ultimate Adventure, going from one huge theatre to another, packed with, 2,000 fans.
Yeah.
It's an extraordinary experience when that sort of thing happens.
Mm. Just to touch on the Ultimate Adventure, just very briefly here, I think I actually saw the performance in Liverpool at the Empire, which John did. Yeah, the Empire Theatre. It was a wonderful, wonderful show. I didn't see the occasion when, of course, you had to take on the lead role. So you are, of course, in canon terms, you are the Doctor as much as anybody else. When it came to taking that role on, was there any time to think, or was it simply you're on and just on you go? And if that's the case, who was your Doctor Who? What was the character like of your Doctor, would you say?
It was my Doctor Who. It was my Doctor. You can't, I mean, that was the reason I insisted on having my own costume, because I was understudying John. And, I could see the pitfalls in having to put a wig on and a velvet jacket and so on, having a sonorous voice. And so I think the personality of the Doctor, the vehicle that the Doctor comes in each time he regenerates, allows enough flexibility for another personality to come in. So mine was based around what was sort of central to the play, which was the fact that we're destroying the planet. Recall, this is 30 years ago.
Yes, yeah.
And yet we knew then. We were quite aware then.
Yeah.
And so that's why I wore the Greenpeace T-shirt. And but the rest of it is simply taking Terence Dix's wonderful storytelling and playing it out. It was a piece that worked very well. Yeah. Even though he admitted to me he hated the Cybermen, Daleks for him, but he was able to work through all of that and give a very entertaining piece of theatre. We all played.
As an actor who's obviously got a real interest in characterization and looking for that motivation of character, when you come to the Cybermen, then how do you approach them as characters? Because aside from Revenge of the Cybermen, we saw them there having some emotion. Some would say a little too much in some cases, but we didn't have the blank computer when you were in Doctor Who. So how did you approach bringing such a character to life, especially as, of course, because we couldn't see, apart from your chin occasionally, we couldn't actually see your face. So how did you bring them to life?
Well, I think I didn't have any reference to Revenge of the Cybermen. I probably had seen it 7 years before. I'm not sure about that, but I'd definitely seen 10th Planet. Now we can just go to YouTube and see all sorts of clips. So an actor approaching it now, or a writer approaching it now, is kind of spoiled for choice, or really, there are generous amounts of research material there. For me, I just had to rely on my memory and on the script. And Eric Saward's script was deeply immersed, really, in what he knew and remembered of the Cybermen. I think he'd had contact with Jerry Davis and Kip Pedler. And Kip Pedler had died by that time. I think he had just died, actually. So it was a question, as with any script that I'd had before, of looking at the character as it was presented. Now, I didn't know anything about this raging debate between, too emotional and not emotional enough, or whatever. I simply played the character. In my interpretation, it would have been slightly less emotional, I think. But Peter Grimwade needed something dramatic at the end of that first episode. And so he said, can you raise the stakes a bit at the end? So that's why there is, at that moment, something different about the Cybermen than you see in previous Cybermen. It's destroy them at once. Now there's an intensity there, and so when I started thinking about it and writing the book, I made up this thing of saying, well, it's not emotional. It's not emotion This is a kind of mechanical thing. This is I called it uh, kind of a logical given. If you're going to conquer and survive, you've got to have an intensity about the way you do it. And it's just a way of getting round what is, after all, just a story, just a fiction, and a bunch of actors trying to make the best of what they're doing. But these things add up. And, I found when I was writing my cyber book that there were already a number of stories you could put together and create a history of. You had to change around some of the chronology, but there it is. And you've got a clear ascent, as it were, of logic being interlaced with something like emotion, as through the 500 years between 10th Planet and Earthshock.
Mm. In a way, I suppose, you became the custodian of the Cybermen, didn't you? That whole lore is from your book, really, which now spans, it's widely accepted. Did that feel like a responsibility, or was it just a really good writing exercise for you?
It was a great writing exercise. Most of it was written when I was rehearsing and performing theatre, television. And I didn't, of course, realize I couldn't know what kind of influence it would have or whether it would get published at all. But working with Andrew Skilleter, who I recognized as somebody who was superbly able to illustrate the book and had ideas of producing a book before I met him about the Cybermen. So it was a kind of a conjunction, a lucky conjunction towards the end of the 80s. Of course, I wrote most of it before Silver Nemesis. So it was only in the paperback version I was able to add a little bit. We put in some more photographs that it came up to date with that. Now, fans have often asked me, why don't you go back and revise the book? Well, it was such an immense job to do what I did. The thought really frightens me. I think, you ought to get a Cyberman to do it.
And, well, our new Cybermen, of course, are from a parallel universe as well, which adds a whole different problem in, I suppose.
Yeah, well. Yeah. I don't want to do that. I think Age of Steel for one of them, isn't it? And set in a parallel universe. And I don't want to do the writers down at all. But it was, very, very interesting story, I think. And taking elements of the past Cybermen, of the cyber history. But it's a slight get out, isn't it? To put it in an alternative universe. It's a bit like, having a story which is fantastic and engrossing and so on, and then the narrator, the person who's the hero, wakes up and sees it was a dream.
It's that Dallas moment, yeah.
Yeah.
No, fair enough. So with the Cybermen then, in terms of character development, when you've played the Cyber Leader, and I'm thinking from Earthshock all the way through to Hour of the Cybermen with Big Finish.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Which I listened to again last night. It's very good. It's such a good piece of work.
Yeah. Andrew Smith.
Andrew Smith, yeah.
Very well written. Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah. Is he the same character when you're playing him? Do you think that this is the same Cyber Leader that we're seeing at different points in their existence? Or is it a different Cyber Leader who's had certain things downloaded to them? How do you perceive the line?
It's a fascinating subject, fascinating question. Thanks for asking. It's and because it ties in with something which is rather voguish at the moment, trending at the moment, which is the idea of uploading, getting yourself uploaded. And I do this talk called Life as an Emotionless Killing Machine. And I was giving this to a group of students who were in London. They're American students, but they were in London. And we had a fascinating discussion afterwards. And one of the guys I was talking to, said, but, I'm looking forward to getting uploaded. He was serious. He was serious. Now, this idea of uploading was something that I suppose I kind of ventured to suggest as the reason for the cyber leader coming back after being utterly destroyed. How does the cyber leader come back? Because evidently he's got a very similar character, if not the same character. Mm-hmm. Basically, because I'm inside it.
Yeah.
And it's the same actor. How do you explain that if you are archivist Hegelia, as my narrator is in the central part of the Cyberman book? Thinking that these are documents, you've got to make an academic assessment of this. The assessment she makes is that clearly there is something central, some hub, some core of the cyber leader who keeps coming back. And how do you do that? Well, in some way it's uploaded. The personality, the data stored in the memory is uploaded. When I suggested that, I didn't think 30 years later we would be seriously talking that 18-year-olds would be thinking that they could actually do this. Mm. It's rubbish. They can't do it, of course. And we won't be able to do this for centuries, probably, if at all. But it brings home the power of imaginative science fiction and the way that we talk so glibly about the technological march. We don't even think of it as a march. That's kind of H.G. Wells's term. We think of it as inevitable. We have so got used to the idea that every year, we get a new scientific breakthrough or whatever. We think it's going to go on forever like that. And I think the thing about this interval that we are in now with the coronavirus shows us that, well, it's a bit thin, this ice that we're skating on, this ice that we call civilization. Mm. We could easily fall through the cracks. Where do we find ourselves then? How anybody listening to our conversation, who of them would know how to keep electricity running, for example? Without that, how do we keep contact in the way that we got used to, the way that's so useful at the moment, the way that allows us to talk to each other?
Yeah.
These bring in very kind of, profound and interesting thoughts.
Do you think that maybe this period now is? I don't know. I've been reading up on. We mentioned it before, the Gaia hypothesis.
Yeah.
And I was having a chat with someone the other day about the idea that this is maybe our planet sort of saying this is a warning. Maybe there's a little bit of that. Do you think that this is an opportunity for people to learn?
To learn, yes. Yeah, it's and it's going to be very interesting to see how differently we see what's precious and what isn't after we get through this. And I don't know. I'm slightly pessimistic about it, and I wish I could be more hopeful. And I remember when I was giving this talk I mentioned 10 years ago, maybe longer. First time I gave it, I was in Australia, in the University of Melbourne, and I'd just become aware going over there how big the coal industry was, for example. And I was asked, was I pessimistic or optimistic about our ability to see our position, to the absolute essential fact that we have to do something to avoid climate change. Mm. And I couldn't be optimistic. And I never dreamt, though, that things would have been so ignored just in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Now, when you mention is the planet getting back at this, of course, I don't think that James Lovelock, who invented the Gaia hypothesis, I don't think that he thought of Gaia quite in those terms, but he's thinking totally cybernetically. Cybernetics, Norbert Wiener, in 1948 wrote the book, Cybernetics. He created the science. And he showed that this was simply a mechanical way, a scientific way of understanding, well, it was called control, communication and control in animal and machine. He was trying to make the connection. And, you know, there are some very useful ways in which we can get machines to act a bit like humans, but intelligently.
Yeah.
But the basis, the core of cybernetics is that we fix on a goal and we get to that goal by continually refixing on it. So if we come to an obstacle, we find a way around it, and then we fix on the goal again, and we do it in that way. Now, the planet, Gaia, this kind of living organism, which our whole biosphere represents, is that cybernetic creature. This is what James Lovelock is sort of saying. And so it's not out to get us. It is just there. And if we flout its rules, if we do something which puts it out of balance, we will be put back into balance. And if that means that we are decimated, or if we disappear from the planet, that is what happens to us. It is not necessarily what is being done to us by an intelligent entity. It's what we bring on ourselves. And I would love, you know, for us to get out of this crisis, this plague, and understand that, so that, you know, it has taken this to understand what key workers really are.
Yes.
And why do we have this inverted pyramid? Why do we allow such large rewards to those people who simply create more and more money and more destruction of our earth and more destruction of us? Why isn't the pyramid the other way around? Those people should be on the bottom. And the people who have been last should be rewarded first.
Absolutely. I mean, we're seeing what happens when they're not, I suppose, to an extent, but an opportunity to learn, I suppose, if we can treat it like that. What would, in terms of lessons that could be learned, if you could go back to have a word with your younger self who's just finished training and going into rep, what would be the piece of advice that you would give them in hindsight?
I don't think any, no. But I don't know if advice is any good. I think we have to learn these lessons ourselves. And probably it's just a matter of trying to work these things out and to listen all the time and to realize you don't have all the answers. I've just given a sermon and I'm a bit sorry for giving the sermon, but this is me being passionate and trying to be a bit logical, you know, about the present situation. But it's how I see it. If other people don't see it like that, then, you know, let them find their own explanations and their own way forward. I'm sorry, younger David Banks. I can't give you any advice. Find it out for yourself.
Fair enough. At the moment, David, so you've been working on a project that goes back to 1993, which is a Doctor Who book that you wrote called Iceberg.
Yeah.
And you're working with that book again. It's a fascinating book. I think it's an incredibly brave Doctor Who book, because not only is the language, well, not suitable for transmission on BBC One at 7:35 in the evening, but you were also quite brave there, and you don't bring the Doctor in as a character until about halfway through the book, which is an interesting thing to do for a Doctor Who book.
Well, he starts acting, he starts appearing before that, but you know, he doesn't come into his own, shall we say, until halfway through.
Yeah. But so you've started reworking that as an audio format. So what made you think, this is the right time to revisit this? Is it because there will be a new audience out there who are now unfamiliar, I suppose, with the books that came out?
I don't know. I don't know what happened to the New Adventure series.
Mm.
It became part of that, the interregnum, shall we say, between the old series and the new series. It carried the torch for a bit, and then Big Finish came along and carried the torch even brighter. You know, their wonderful work through that those years before 2005. Mm. It was a book kind of dear to my heart. It was taking all sorts of themes that had come to me when I was writing Cybermen, and in my talks with many fans who, you know, are interested in these kind of subjects, as well as, you know, having the funny stories about whether it's hot in the costume and all that. Mm. And so that's where it starts, really. I wanted to investigate not only Cybermen and who's inside, and that's something which, you know, has been looked at more closely in the new series. I'd like to think it was something to do with my investigation, but why? Why should it be? It's an essential, you know, investigation to carry out. Not only that, but also what's inside the Doctor. How is he seen by somebody who meets him for the first time? Mm. And I felt to do that, yes, I knew it was a bit of a risk, but to do that, I needed to investigate who is the central character, Ruby Duval, investigative reporter, quite young, she becomes 22 during the course of the book. But we get to know her backstory first. And then she's on a cruise going to Antarctica. Mm-hmm. And of course, there are themes, there are very strong themes about climate change, about global warming, which this is now so 20 years ago now?
1993 it came out.
Yeah, almost 30 years ago.
30, yeah.
We knew about these things then. Mm. And I tied it up with the Cybermen. Wanted to go back to 10th Planet, to where they were found, which is Antarctica. But I wanted that moment when we knew we had lived almost, you know, in the novel, we had lived with somebody in real life. And this is something that H.G. Wells, actually, thinking about him, he mentioned that this is what you need to do with science fiction. You get something which seems to be magical because it comes from, you know, far out in our imagination about what could happen. But everything else must be rooted in real life. Mm. And so that's what Ruby was, rooted in real life. She was trying to find out about what was going on. There is a plague happening. More and more people are dying. But she goes in this cruise ship. And there, in an engine room, she meets a man and some kind of oriental box, some kind of pagoda.
Yeah.
Pagoda. And he claims that he travels through time and space in that pagoda. That's the thing. And eventually she realizes that having, you know, being really suspicious of him at first, she comes to trust him in a very deep way. And that's the other, it seems to me, the theme of heart in Doctor Who, that the Doctor is somebody eventually you can really trust with your life.
With the headset and control gloves in place, you could choose to pilot a fighter plane or drive a tank through Brooklyn. Or you might find yourself in some dark labyrinth, laser weapon in hand, picking off hordes of nasty aliens that were always creeping up on you. But Ruby preferred the lucid dreaming. Selecting the lucid dreaming mode, she would suddenly be soaring miles above an incredible tectonic landscape, painted in sparkling blues and gorgeous reds, awesome yellows and soothing greens. The magical kingdom of cyberspace. She drifted above a fantasy world of infinite discovery. She would swoop down to explore the detail of the landscape, and the terrain would swirl up to her and open like a flower. There would be rocky canyons to examine, or shimmering rivers to follow to their source, or new, uncharted seas. Those 15-minute sessions never seemed enough, but it was all that was allowed by medical decree. The World Health Organization guidelines for avoidance of mental impairment were displayed in large letters on the side of the Vril machine. Ruby could understand why. She found it incredibly addictive. Somebody had recently condemned it as yet another glitch switch for the mind. They might be right. Cyberspace was dangerous.
That book, when you look at it, what does that book mean to you? I mean, was it several years of your life in terms of work, or what does it mean to you?
Well, I wrote it when I got the commission. I gave myself 6 months, and I wrote it in 3 months because I was interrupted by a play that I did, King's Head, I think, in London. But it was a story that had been growing in my mind for about 3 years, I think. It was something that I was thinking through, and then a fan, actually, who was very good at making video games, wanted some kind of scenario. And so I broadened it out to be a scenario for a video game, which never came to anything. But that was sort of the basis of it, I suppose. And Peter Darvill Evans, who was the editor of the New Adventures, he liked the idea, but he said, "You'll have to write it. This is what you had to do. You had to present it to him in the series, form of, the plot, basically." And I thought that was a bit constrictive, but I found that actually the characters do what the characters always do. If you're writing a play or whatever, they have lives of their own. And even though you've got to try and make them fit the plot line, sometimes they do it in ways that you'd never expect. And that includes the Cyber Leader, actually.
Yes. So with the Cyber Leader, if we go to Hour of the Cybermen, the Big Finish play, when I listen back to that, it's so interesting for me because when Earthshot went out, I was quite young, and I genuinely found your performance terrifying. And then listening to Hour of the Cybermen, I got the same sensation. And there's something, and I'm not sure, was it a conscious decision that you made to give the character more menace? Because obviously we've only got audio, we haven't got the wonderful costume. Was there a decision that you made to really almost bring out it's not sadistic, I can't put my finger on it, and I was trying to last night, but there's something in the character there that's Machiavelli, it's so interesting. I don't know what it is.
Thank you. And you've got to give credit to Andrew Smith for writing it as he did. It's the central part of it, I suppose, is that, and you're just drinking a glass of water now. That's one of the themes that we get total world domination through a glass of water in some way, but it's that denial of water. And so I wanted to look at it from the point of view of this interplay of emotion and of logic. And it came to me that we know people, there are humans, and they're called psychopaths. And they seem to have no emotion, but they seem to want to inflict pain or death in horrible ways on people. Now, how does that come about? So I sort of played him as the ultimate psychopath, I suppose.
It worked. It really does work. It's for anybody watching this, listen to this play. It's phenomenal. It's rather chilling, but it's very good. Just to move on briefly, Canary Wharf, which you mentioned briefly before.
Yeah.
For anybody who doesn't know, a soap opera that ran for a year on live TV. And it feels to me like it's a show of two halves. The first 6 months or so being a business-based soap opera, and the last 6 months going a little bit more towards the unusual and the sci-fi, a touch towards the X-Files in a way. There was various storylines like that. I was wondering, did you have an influence on that at all, or was that how the show just developed?
So going back to the idea of soap, you can't say what influence you have, but it's true that the writer, you come in, you read the first few scripts of your character, you get your character. But after that, the writers are looking at your performance, they're looking at you. And what they write becomes more entwined with what you are, what you're bringing to the show. So there's this strange dance that's going on. Now, it's happened in both my soaps sorry, I say my soaps. It happened in Brookside as well. Mm-hmm. I came in, I thought I'd be marrying one of the lead people in it, and living happily ever after on the royalties, but it didn't happen that way. I turned into somebody who was accused of murder, and eventually, had my throat slit in the prison. With something similar happened in Canary Wharf. I didn't become, a murderer or whatever, or suspected murderer, but yes, there was something inhabiting Canary Wharf itself, something that was mysterious and couldn't be explained. And gradually, we came to understand that there were aliens, and they came and took us away. And there's the last scene that I'm in, they're taking me away. They're coming to get me. And then the whole of Canary Wharf Tower disappears as well. And
it's a remarkable ending.
Well, what fault of mine that was, the person playing it, I don't know.
Jenny, it's happening. They're here. They're here.
I think it's a remarkable end for a show, and it's absolutely not the wake up and it was all a dream. I mean, they went for it.
Yeah. Except that Canary Wharf is still there, isn't it? So it's a dream in some kind of way.
Yeah, that's true. I'm always, if I'm in London, I always find it. I do. I always sort of look, give it a strange look. Think, shouldn't be there, but there we go. Well, we should probably end around now, but I would like to ask you one last question, if I may, David. Attack of the Cybermen, 1985. We saw you on screen with Michael Kilgarriff as the cyber controller from Tomb of the Cybermen. Would you go back to the new series as our classic cyber leader and see what happens when we place him into this new series concept? Would you want to do that? Would you be interested to see that happen?
Well, I'd be very flattered to be asked, I think, but there is the thing of, in that generation, we Cybermen could walk and talk. And that seems to have passed the cyber race by. They don't have that talent anymore. So I wouldn't like that. I don't think I would. And this is something that Michael Kilgarriff himself complained about. Really, he said he was on a wage low, because all he did was learn the lines and open his mouth, and somebody else spoke them. No, I wouldn't like to come back to that.
No. But if they were to bring you back as the cyber leader that we know, maybe?
Yeah, but I don't think it's ever going to happen. I'd rather do something else. I am doing something else. You know, I'm creating this audiobook. I've got a book of Canary Wharf. Based on a journal I wrote, and I've just written a 17th century play, basically, Afra Ben. I'm very interested in our first professional female playwright, and I don't think she's well enough known. I've had conversations with certain academics about this, and one of the projects was writing a play during the 3 years that she seemed to disappear from view, and so I hope to put that on. I've got a play called Five Marys Waiting, which I'm waiting to put on, and I've spoken to Sophie about this, so these are all the things which really matter to me at the moment, and I'm sure it was a matter of fate, a fluke, that I played the cyber leader in the first place, and that joy is waiting to happen to another actor now.
Fair enough. David Banks, thank you very much for coming along and talking to us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Bye-bye.